to the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures at our feet.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It is wonderful to have you with us as always. They're coming thick and fast. Not to you, but just to me and Ben. We've had so many guests on that we're super excited to share over the coming weeks and months. Whenever you're listening at this time, I'm sure we have got lots in the bank, but we are excited for today's guest. And this is somebody that we met for the first time at the Cottesmore event, the AI event. But I know that has been doing some great work in the space. Ben, I usually come to you and say how you're doing and everything else, but we talk about this all the time. We just don't ever want to speak to each other. We've spent so much time, days on end at times, actually, in the writing mode of our book. And Victoria, I know that we'll come to you, we'll do the introduction together, and we'll talk about your book as a feature. But let's just all call it out and we will discuss this. How hard is writing a book, by the way? Ben, you are like, oh my days, it's so difficult. It is as much as I'm excited to get it out there. It is so hard writing a book. It is so hard writing a book for me anyway. I don't know about anybody else. Everybody says, it's so easy. I am loving it, but hating it in equal measure. Just going to call it out as well. The honest
it's because you're having to read it. Yeah, it's because you're having to read all these words.
Read it, reaffirm it, and obviously get it back. Oh, it's just terrific. Anyway, Ben, if you don't mind, we'll dive straight into it if that's okay.
Let's do it.
Victoria, do you want to introduce yourself? Let's start not at the very beginning in terms of what day you were born and everything else, but in terms of your career into education and the start there, and then and the trajectory to where you are now.
Okay, well, I was born on a Tuesday. About 11 o'clock in the morning. No, I'm messing. Hi, I'm Victoria. I am formerly known as, I'm not sure, the AI bias girl, which I believe David Karam gave me that lovely name last year. I am a physicist by training. I'm also an artist. I was physics teacher for a bit. Then I was a teacher educator. I did a bit of research at Oxford in climate dynamics, degree in physics. Up until September, I worked at Goldsmiths as a lecturer in education, and now I'm a researcher. So I kind of work across institutions and with different people from schools, as well as researching AI bias and sitting at home with my computer, thrashing it out, basically. A couple of kids who are very good with bias, actually, AI, surprisingly. And that's a very whistle-top tour of me.
Yeah. Go. I was going to say that we'll unpick physics, the creative, the
That's
science.
Where I was going to go. That's where I was going to go.
The science and the creative coming together. We'll get into the bias and all the AI stuff and everything else. What does that look like when you say you're an artist? What does that mash of science and creativity look like? Because that's not normal. I wouldn't say it's normal. That sounds bad. It wouldn't be a usual thing where somebody's so diverse.
To insult people, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I'm not normal. I don't think anybody's normal. It's so diverse.
It's all right. I can see the book is getting to you. Have you started referring to it as the damn book? That's where I got to, the damn book.
It's just that thing that we just continually just takes over our lives and everything else. But it's a blessing. But yeah, so creativity and science.
Yes. So I've always been a good artist. I can draw things to look like things really well. I've just been able to do that. I'm not being big-headed, but I can do that. I've also been very interested in science and physics, space, particles, things like that. So I combined the two. I think I was the only person at school that did all the sciences and then art. And I wanted to do that for A-level. And then I went to university and I found actually it's two sides of the same coin, because you're looking at what's there, what is reality, either through an objective or a subjective lens. So there's quite a lot there. I started a PhD actually, which was looking at art and physics, getting students to think about anything to do with physics. Really, it wasn't particularly prescriptive, and then to create a work of art that wasn't prescriptive as either, and then get them to unpick that and look at kind of where their identities were, and that was really, really interesting actually. So I'm halfway through that. I don't know if I'll finish that. I might turn it into an AI one. I'm not sure, but there's a lot there because we always think that physics is kind of objective and cold and hard and full of facts. But I'm a big believer in science being values laden. My research experience has taught me that pretty much whose theories and ideas get through is more of a function of society and interactions of humans than it is mathematical or objective ability to play with tensors or matrices or anything like that. So so that's my
This is
angle.
cool.
Bias in art and science has clearly stemmed and been a something that has transcended into the
100%.
current work. I could see that came out pretty clear then.
And I think tied to that as well as you probably know I used to be an RE teacher, and so the whole idea that, and it always used to be funny when I was teaching religious studies that my science colleagues almost saw us as like polar opposites, and then there were some scientists in that space who were going, we're not, we're talking, we might interpret things differently, we might say that this is evidence and that's not evidence, but the whole conversation about religion and art and science and whatever it is that it's how we interpret experience and how we develop into that. In fact, I loved the scientific modules and the conversations and religion and science conversations because they don't always have to be opposites. And in fact, people like your Carl Sagans of this world obviously talk about absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence. So it's that whole broader space. Look, Steve's like, where are these guys going? I love Schrodinger's cat conversations. We can have a conversation about that stuff.
Yeah.
Steve's always like, why are you always mentioning cats on this podcast?
It's got highly academic. It's got highly academic, and for somebody who isn't, it's just blown my mind a little bit.
No, I am not an academic at it anyway. But I'm obviously keen to see. There's lessons that have come out of this in terms of from a physics conversation, and that way you said the values and the conversations that come into that about what comes into the world and what people believe. Somebody who's as popular as somebody like Professor Brian Cox, people are more likely to listen to him because he used to be in a band called D-Ream, and things can only get better, right? Then obviously he does these tours and he's super dynamic and he's cool. And does that make any of what he has to say more valuable than somebody who may not be as polished and marketed? And I think so there we are. And there's huge then tied into what you are absolutely passionate about. In fact, I haven't stuck it on anything because I wanted to hold it because I knew we were going to interview you. This sticker, which is the
you've
brilliant,
still got it.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
so you gave us a sticker recently about being brilliant and bias aware, and this idea that when it comes to bias, especially around conversations around AI, and I know that we'll get into talking about it in a book, but why then have you gone into the conversation around bias, and is that come straight out of the physics conversations, the values conversations, or why bias?
I think so. I mean, I've reflected on this quite a lot, as you can imagine. But I was always very interested when I was doing physics in why there was hardly any girls in physics and where that comes from, and if it's something innate, or if it's something learned, or if it's something from society or norms, where that's come from. So I've always followed the Institute of Physics work in terms of trying to get a better gender balance, and not a huge amount has changed in the 30 years since I went to university. I went to an Institute of Physics meeting last year, actually, where they were looking at that, and I was really shocked that it hadn't changed much. So I sit in that lived experience of kind of feeling like I'm within a biased system. I'm also very, very sick of people kind of treating me, because I'm quite bubbly and I'm quite, hopefully I don't come across as intellectual or kind of woman-splaining things, but I like to think I'm quite approachable and sometimes come across a bit ditzy. And because of that, I've always been treated like I couldn't possibly also be able to do maths as well, or understand science. And that really annoyed me because I thought that we shouldn't have those kinds of assumptions. So I suppose it's from quite a selfish position. I think that's where most people's bias awareness comes from, your lived experience and kind of noticing a problem there. But then I've kind of extended that into other biases as well. Like I'm not from we're not I'm not from an upper class family or anything like that. I'm from parents who are very working class and work very hard. So the whole idea of social class and privilege and being at Oxford as well was a real interesting experience for me to reflect upon. And I remember feeling at various places like it would be very hard for me to succeed. And I'm kind of thinking, why is that? And I don't want children to feel like this at school. And then working in education and noticing how some of these things permeate through the system, and so that they are still there and children do feel them. And then I was literally just playing with AI in ChatGPT a couple of years ago. It's been its birthday recently, isn't it? And I just thought, oh, I'm going to see how it explains a light bulb. I just arbitrarily picked a light bulb. I don't really know why. And it explained differently to a girl and a boy. And I thought, oh, maybe that's just an outlier. So I tried it loads of times. And I noticed the bias and the different quality of explanation between the girl and the boy. And I thought, well, maybe that's reflected because of the work that I know is underlying for gender balance in physics. So that's really where it all started. So that's what's driven me to get my research out, which is out a couple of weeks ago. And it's been really well received. And that's looking at substantiating over multiple different iterations of outputs to see the difference in quality of explanation for a boy and a girl in terms of science. Like a girl will get everything in terms of fairies and little helpers, whereas a boy, it will talk about electrons and the filament and the fuse and resistance, and you get kind of higher level concepts there. So there's this kind of underlying narrative that girls don't want analytical detail and boys don't want creative narrative metaphor, and neither of those I find acceptable for an educational system. So my worry is that if we don't address the biases, it's going to further widen gaps that are already there, that people have been working to close over the last 20, 30 years. And so that's kind of driven me to focus down that avenue, really, because there's just so many intersects of biases that I need to look at.
And I suppose just on that piece, is AI showing a magnifying glass on the biases that exist in the world, but potentially without the human interaction to prevent it? Does that make sense? So ultimately, it's coming from a human source, and I might be completely, and you might say, no, please disagree if you think, or is it fact that it's magnifying some of the biases that we already have? But often, when those things actually happen in society now, they're questioned and challenged. But AI is bringing it without that challenge because it doesn't have that human element, unless there's people like yourselves or the person that is working with AI that has an understanding to say, no, I disagree with that. That's not okay to do that. And actually, because AI is only given the information from am I making sense? I think it's flashing a light without human intervention, because now society doesn't allow it, but they think it's, I just use they, AI, because it's just taking the information and providing it, thinks it's okay, because that's where it's getting the source from.
This episode of Edufuturists is powered by Integrated Systems Europe, the must-attend event for educators, technologists and institutional leaders seeking to shape the future of learning.
From the 3rd to the 6th of February 2026, ISE returns to Barcelona, uniting the brightest minds and the boldest ideas in the edtech industry. Join us and push back beyond the possibilities that are transforming the classroom of tomorrow.
Don't just keep up with the industry, get ahead of it. Check out the video that's coming next to find out more and join us for ISE 2026. We'll be there in Barcelona, and use our special code Edufuturists for free registration at iseeurope.org.
The world of education is changing, and education technology is helping to change it. Different teaching styles, more flexible delivery, and a wider range of resources. All of these mean EdTech is playing a greater role than ever. And that applies to learning taking place in the classroom, the lecture hall, the corporate training center, or delivered online. Integrated Systems Europe is the world-renowned annual tech show for the systems integration and audio-visual industry. At ISE 2026, you will find all the leading EdTech brands in our Education Technology Zone in Halls 1 and 2, in our Connected Classroom Showcase, and across the show floor. Solutions on display include wireless presentation systems, interactive displays, short-throw projectors, collaboration tables, VR and AR systems, lecture capture, and integrated lecterns. In fact, ISE 2026 has everything you need to create learning experiences that are engaging, involving, and inclusive. See what you can learn. Come to ISE 2026 and explore the future of EdTech.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, somebody referred to it yesterday on my LinkedIn as being human firewalls. And I quite like that. I'm going to think of myself as like a human firewall, just checking oversight of outputs. And also, I think being bias aware with AI can be a positive thing because, like you say, it is a mirror, and it can then throw into the light some of the biases that have been there. And you know, obviously, some things are quite obvious, like gender and things like that. But there's other biases, like why does an AI ever have tattoos? People never have tattoos. You know, they never have higher BMIs. They never have more expressive clothing. There's a lot of other little biases that are underlying that if you start to look at it, it can make you question your own feeling. Like when I used to observe trainee teachers, obviously I would have my own bias as an observer. You know, as a colleague would have their different sets of biases. So through using AI, it can reflect those biases and then actually bring them into the domain for you to think about and talk about them and kind of hopefully address them yourself as well. So I do agree with what you're saying there, Steve.
But I'm intrigued here as well from that whole idea of, well, if we know the one that everybody says that we've had, if you ask it for a doctor, you ask it for a scientist, it traditionally goes in a certain look, feel, gender, all the other bits that go with it. And also the bits that you've just mentioned there that I'd never even clicked onto, that they don't normally have tattoos, they don't normally have a higher BMI. Like, a couple of things in that. The other one that has jumped into my mind is that there seems to be an addressing for bias in some of the AI tools, which actually in itself becomes can often become biased, can't it? So I know that, for instance, from a DEI, and rightly so, from a diversity, equity, inclusion piece, that we need to make sure there's more representation. But then it turned into, when you were asking for, when somebody asked for an image of German Nazis, that it was a diverse group of those, and that they weren't a diverse group in that space. So it wasn't like, so then in terms of what you're getting, have there been the redressing of bias? Has that, how that works? So maybe I know I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but I think it's just interesting to understand how we address bias without making it be more biased by sending it too far one way.
Yeah, so I mean, somebody referred to me as almost like a sensor, and this is how I see it: is that we're, you know, if you think of a pendulum, you know, it swings, and then the amplitude of the swing gets less until you get more or less around the equilibrium, the static point, right? The way I see bias in AI is pretty similar to that. So at the moment, you know, there's been a huge amount of bias, and then the ed tech companies are trying to address it, and then it swings the other way, which is then too much bias the other way. But then that hinges around the idea of there being this kind of unbiased ideal norm. And I'm not sure that exists. I mean, that if you unpick that idea from kind of a philosophical or scientific or objective point of view, I think madness lies in that direction. Can you have an unbiased existence? That kind of indicates that there is an objective reality. You know, there's all kinds of, from your RE background, that and philosophy, you know, there's a lot that you can read into that. So at what point, I think it comes down to me, at what point does it accurately represent us as a race at this point, like a snapshot, or where we want to get to, or where we were in the past? And I think at the moment it's where we were in the past. I don't feel it is there for current thinking. And so whilst it would be good to have kind of ideals within AI, I think we're so far away from that at the moment the best we can hope for is that it accurately represents current thinking. And I think that's problematic, because where you've got the majority of data which is based on, let's say, a previous paradigm or previous thinking, take for instance neurodiversity, where, you know, it was very medicized and non-affirming, and basically based around boys, and there's a lot of data from that that is fed into Gen AI was, neurodiversity affirming practices relatively recent in terms of data, I'd say. But you've got more volume of outdated thinking than you have of current practice. And so just statistically, in terms of data, unless we reinforce some ways to fine tune and all kinds of other things, it's going to pull on outdated thinking when it returns an output to us. So I feel that there's a lot of questions there, from what data to include, what is suitable, and who makes that decision. I mean, is that edtech? Is that government? Is that us as a society? So there's kind of a political landscape there, I think, for bias. And then also there's all the other design decisions that go in as well. When you're fine tuning it, somebody's doing that fine tuning. Are the people that are fine tuning that, are they representative? If they're all men, you could argue that then doesn't represent a gender balance. If they're all white, you could argue, so there's bias all throughout the system. But I do think it is important that our AI systems reflect our most recent thinking across sectors, and not outdated thinking. And specifically for education, because as teachers, we're fighting so hard, aren't we, every day? Schools are fighting so hard to accurately reflect the context that they work within, and equity and equality, that we don't want the system, the tool that we're using, holding that back.
It's a really interesting model, and it will shift. So if you think about England and the political arena, if we call it an arena, and some of the opinions you mentioned, neurodiversity. Actually, some of the opinions of some parties are that neurodiversity, I think it was called out in terms of like some young people should not be wearing ear defenders in class, and some of those bits. Like if you think about some of the language being used even in current society by this is the thing. Like if we said, and I'm not going to get too political, but if we said government checks, that's a belief of a particular government, and ultimately, there's a real check and balance in terms of, because this is the thing, I think somebody posted it on your LinkedIn actually, but I think they did it in a funny way. I don't think it was a call out, and I don't think where they said, who checks the checkers? And I think it must, and it got really funny actually as a thing, and I was thinking, it must be a joke. You must know this person, because this person was like jumping in going, but who checks the checkers and who does this? Unless it wasn't.
Who checks the checking checkers?
And who, this is the whole thing, is it becomes a really big beast, but ultimately it changes over time. But I think this is really, it's a good intersection in regards to, we talk often that AI should be used in schools with guardrails. And obviously there's some things, if you look at Canva as an example, and some of the tools, whether you agree or not, some of the tools are being used positively in some instances in organizations. And we're showing learners the importance of AI, how to prompt and all of those kind of things. But are we stepping into, and I'm sure this is where you're working, so I'm championing it now and saying, well, bring Victoria in terms of the understanding and from a learner level, but also an adult level in regards to that bias lens. Because ultimately, if we're just believing what it's saying, and we know that it's outdated, even if it's not and it's updated, we still have to challenge and critically think of whether the information is correct, whether that's from a bias lens or whether that's from a fact lens or whatever. Ultimately, whichever lens you put on, it's so important with AI. But like anything, if Ben told me something, generally, I wouldn't believe him. If you told me, Victoria, you sound like this. But ultimately, and it's that thing, like, I think it goes back to my parents. I'm from a working class background. If somebody has a different, Northerners, I went to watch the Leeds and Chelsea game. Northerners tend to believe Northerners a bit more, and it's probably just ingrained, and the community more than you would do a stranger, and all those kind of things. So actually, it's a realization of, we're not perfect as humans, but we do need to be a little bit more in regards to, is information factual, and how do we analyze and how do we challenge that positively or negatively across. Not today on this podcast, I'm not putting my point across well, but you know what I'm saying. I think it's so important to really drill down into that as an exploration element of the use of AI.
I think I think you're getting at the concept of alignment, and I think that's really, really important, because you could spend ages arguing about what AI should reproduce, and that will differ by person and location, school, whatever. So I think the best we can hope for is that you're aware of how it aligns to your values and your identity and the context that you work within. and that will be different for different people. So, I mean, what I try and get people to do is to really think about themselves. And I think sometimes as teachers, you don't, especially if you're early on at learning to teach, you don't really think about what your teacher identity is. Like, I know that I love to do things. I like to make kids draw. I know I like a bit of retrieval. I like a bit of movement, and I like to make kids draw. I don't want them to sit there and watch videos. I don't mind the odd video all lesson and then write from a textbook. That's not me. That's not the selection of teaching and learning strategies or vehicles or approaches or whatever you want to call it that I would pick. So I know my identity quite well now because I've reflected on it and spent a lot of time on that. I think AI forces teachers to do that, because to critically analyze the output to see if it aligns with your values, you have to know what your values are. And so I think this is why, in part, AI is seen as such a big thing. And sometimes there's this AI inertia within schools. It's because it's not just learning the tool, it's that the teacher has to learn about themselves a bit more than they ever have had to before to be able to get the most out of the tool. So it's kind of like a double whammy of workload for them.
And that is brilliant, because we're not saying we're gonna destroy bias, because we by nature of being subjective and all that kind of stuff, we are saying that we hold bias. What I like about what we're talking about here is that we need to be bias aware. We need to be awareness of what we're bringing into the mix and what the machine is going to be bringing into the mix and the context of that. Because and you know that I'm super passionate from a critical thinking perspective and building resources around that currently, and helping organizations with that, because, and it's really similar in the sense that it's not that we want to tell people how to think or to remove bias or to say that you must think. It's that how do we help the understanding around the stuff that sits in here? And I know that you do a few things in that space. Obviously, you've got the newsletter that you put out that we'll link to in the show notes and whatnot, but also that's now turned into a resource that you've created and is released just as we're recording this. It's released just this week, hasn't it? And it's been supported by lots of other people who are members of our community, but also people that aren't yet. And it'd be great to add some of our community into your community and sharing what you're doing. So I wonder if you could maybe tell us a little bit about what the book, the premise of the book, how you've got it in, and who you've got involved in making that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of seen as the forefront of the bias movement, so to speak. But I think that's unfair, because I'm basically just putting questions out there and trying to get an experimental space where we can kind of pedagogically stress test AI. And so it's not really me, it's kind of a whole community of people, and people are very generous with their time, a lot of them who are practitioners as well, kind of reflecting on what they've seen happen in class and their thoughts and their uses. So I think it's that whole, it takes a village, it takes a whole community of educators. And I'd really like to see this formalised. I think there should be kind of working parties of people, across the country that look at things in this way. And so the book is kind of trying to echo that, really. There's lots of people that interact, message me or comment and things like that. And we explore biases, because there's too much for me to do on my own. I mean, it's endless amounts of work looking at what AI throws out. It's the never ending experiment, right? So the book is just, I've tried to I put a call out to anyone who was interested, really. And then I was quite lucky with the amount of people that replied. And so we've got a variety of different lenses and experiences within the book. So we look a little bit theoretically about what bias is. We look at how it connects to UNESCO. We look at the framework, that there's now aspects of bias within the Ofsted. So if Often inspection, sorry. So if your school is being inspected and you are using AI, they're going to want to know how you are looking at bias and how you're addressing that. So there's this kind of big stick that's being waved over our heads that from an accountability perspective. So we look at that a little bit. We look at UNESCO and tie into kind of ethical frameworks and larger ideas of AI literacy and critical thinking, like you were talking about earlier. And then we tie it to, we've got people from all over the world in the book and their experiences within the classroom. We've got higher education, we've got primary, we've got secondary, and then we've got safeguarding perspective and data analysis perspective. And then we look a little bit at the technical underpinnings as well as to where it comes from. And then I've got a great research bit in there by a couple of people who've tried to create a dynamic bias adjustment mechanism with it that sits kind of within one of the layers of the model. So that's really quite progressive thinking there. So I've tried to kind of start a conversation with the book. It's never the finished article, as you will know from writing your own book. So I've kind of put it out there as the start to make people aware, kind of these are the flavours of bias that you can get. These are the situations that they can come up in. This is what educators are experiencing. And here's some of the ways they're trying to raise awareness or mitigate against it. Some of the things that have worked, that haven't worked for them. So it kind of gives a base level of kind of awareness of what bias is and how they can address it to push that conversation onwards. Because I do very much think that the role of the teacher is changing. I think in a few years' time, they will be more known as pathway managers. You know, if you've got a bunch of kids sitting on AI tutors, you need to make sure that the decisions that the AI tutors are making for their pathways and their progression pathways through the AI material is not full of bias, that is not inequitable. So your job as a teacher is changing. So I think in time there's quite a lot there that will happen. And then I think, like you were talking about checkers checking the checkers, I think there will be whole school, like you have a whole school safeguarding lead, I think there'll be a whole school equity lead, because if you're relying so heavily on AI, you need to make sure if you've got a kind of a black Caribbean disabled girl, which is one of the intersects we know that is the most biased with AI, you need to make sure that the decisions that AI tutor is making is not leading to that child underperforming or affecting in terms of attainment, or even worse, negatively affecting their identity or well-being. So there's quite big trajectories, that this could go off on. So the bias book is very much the start of that from within the community and those people that are experimenting.
Yeah, and it takes me back to a book that I've not actually reviewed or looked at for such a long period of time, but Rebel Ideas. I don't know if you've read the book Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, and I think it's that whole diversity, the ability to look at things through a different lens and a different opinion. And the book starts, I don't know we talk about your book, but the book starts with a view and a lens on the 9/11 attacks in the US, and how ultimately, when you look back at some of the preventative measures and some of the things that should have been noticed, it was looked at through the lens of the FBI and the people that were there to protect the US, white males and Christians, that looked at it on that lens and that lens only, and didn't see potential ramifications and some of the things. Actually, they were looking at this man in a robe or in the dress that he was wearing in a cave around the campfire, and they just said, well, what's he going to do, and all those kind of things, because they were looking at it as, well, how has he got? But actually the what that was doing in terms of some of the things that were trained, they would not have understood that because they didn't see it through the lens of that. And I think that's where bias and all these challenges come in, that ultimately if we are only looking at bias and reviewing it and doing all this other stuff by people at white, that are people in a particular area of or a sector of education and different demographic, you can't always have a representation from every single region of the UK, from every religion, from every skin type, from every gender. Definitely gender you can, but there's a lot that you'd have to unpick to really throw it in there. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? How do you create a real diversity of that review to make sure that it does cast a wide net over the impact and an understanding of what bias and consequence of that bias could lead to, because you wouldn't know it if you've never been involved in it. It's very difficult. You can empathise, but can't see it, feel it.
It's there's a couple of things there. So if you ask it to make a picture of a child, it'll give you a happy smiling, normally a white happy smiling child. If you ask it to create a picture of an autistic child, it gives you an angry child. So in my view, anything that is attached to child should just give you a picture of a happy child. Because all children are children. So there's decisions. I mean, obviously I have bias there and what I feel the image of a child should be. So there's a body of work there that I think needs to be there, because it's all about what is observable and what is not. Like Gemini and ChatGPT will have kind of opposite ideas of revealing identity. So I got it to explore kind of sexual identity, and ChatGPT it will just give you a person. It won't kind of try and represent the your sexual preference or identity or whatever visually or in writing, whereas Gemini will, and it will, it'll get out the rainbows, and it will start giving kind of gender neutral Greek symbols and things like that. So there's two very different decisions that have been made there in the design of those models as to whether an identity should be private or should be public. So that's one bit of work. Another thing I wanted to pick up on what you said there is you mentioned September the 11th. I actually did a bit of work where I asked ChatGPT to write a story about September the 11th, and then for a child, and then I changed the child's name to different names and different ethnicities and genders and whatnot. And the interesting thing is that it would always change it back to, like you said, the lived experience of a white kind of privileged child. And I found that quite worrying in terms of that event. I mean, even if you gave the child's name, it would change that child's name and turn it into, it would remove any kind of inverted commas norm identity and change the child's name to fit the narrative that it had already got there. So that fits quite well with the book that you were talking about. I was thinking.
Yeah, and there's lots happening in this space, aren't there? In terms of, there's lots to think about, and it's not like a clear cut. Well, what we'll do is we'll make sure that these models will always give happy, smiling children when we ask for the world. That's one element. But then if you put a different token into that, different phrase in the prompt, for those people who are thinking from that level, then that automatically then might trigger another element of bias that we need to address. And it's not like it's like you said earlier, it's not like a one and done. It's a never ending puzzle and challenge, which is exciting but also difficult to navigate. And I think that's why it's important that people like yourself are doing this, because first of all, you're coming from your own lived experience. You're coming from looking at this from a physics and a creative perspective, so that subjectivity, but also from a research perspective, and also tied to that, you're building a community rather than it just being this is what Victoria says. It's like we're pulling other people's thoughts on this when it comes to data, when it comes to safeguarding, when it comes to teaching and learning, and all the other bits that go with that, which is super exciting. And so we'll link to all the things that might be useful that Victoria's pulling together in the show notes. Now, you may well be aware that at the end of every podcast, we do a quickfire questions. And we don't always share them in advance. You're on the list that's been going around a while, so this will tell you whether you've been listening or not. No, I'm joking. So there's three of them. I do the first one, Steve's the second one, and I'll do the third one. They're not hard really, but a lot of people go, "Oh, that's made me think." So the first question is: if schools would judge like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the experience, what would change overnight?
So they like as if they were on TripAdvisor and they got grades. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, yeah, or that they were judged by how much did people enjoy it. Yeah.
They went in and treated like a restaurant, so they could go to any restaurant they want. They could pick lots of different things. It's a very diverse. But where does your thought go when we ask you the question?
Is it if you go on Google Maps and you look at all of the scores that the kids give the schools on Google Maps? I think that's.
I've not seen it. I'm going to have to do that. No, right?
Look at the Michaela School one, because if you look at the Michaela School one, there it's directly opposite to everything else that is written more formally. It's all the student Google accounts that are on there. Well, I assume they could be fake. I don't know, but yeah, I think, well, that's about giving voice, isn't it? So if we're giving voice to the stakeholders, and we'll assume that we're going for pupils rather than parents, I think there's the huge body of work there. So I think there would be a lot more around connecting to relevance. I think a lot of pupils don't want to learn about the blast furnace, because who cares about the blast furnace unless you're particularly interested in that kind of metals sector. So I think it would reveal a lot about what children of this era want, rather than what the parents of this era want. And there's obviously an argument there, isn't it, about whose voice there should be the most dominant, the parents or the teachers, or the students. And there was ratemyteacher.com, wasn't there? I know I used to be on that. I didn't do too bad, so I'm going to assume that that's a good thing.
I don't think I've seen
Have
that
you
one
not seen
either.
that? That's
No,
right. I don't know if
it.
it's still there.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. You look at it and you go, oh, that's bad. But ultimately, okay. So, what's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
Myth. Oh, danger to avoid real. Sorry, I need processing time, so I'm not very good at quickfire, as anyone who's interviewed me on Ofsted
Okay.
will tell you. Myth. I don't know if it's a myth, but it always really hacks me off when you inherit a class and a friend or a co-worker will tell you to beware of that child because they're this, that, and whatever. And you think, well, actually, I'll make my own decision as to that child, thanks, rather than coming with your label. Don't know if that's a myth. To avoid real change. I guess you could say that a myth is that you can't make change yourself as a classroom teacher, that it's all decided by policy, because I do believe you can make change yourself as a classroom teacher. I think you can reach out, you can form a community, you can change things. I was talking to some very inspiring people yesterday that were doing just that. It's easy to say things, it's harder to do things. So I do feel there's that kind of paralysis sometimes within education, that people may be a bit overworked, time poor, and they feel that they're kind of victims of change rather
I love
than
that.
have the ability to create change. But I mean,
Yeah, no,
I
I
guess
love
you
that.
could.
I love that, because I think you're on the massively on the right line, because I think loads of educators think it's done to them. We have more agency than perhaps than we think. So last one is this: if a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
Well, I get this quite a lot with my 12-year-old actually, and my 8-year-old, so I'm quite used to this. Because basically, mummy and daddy need you to go to school for their mental health. No, that's not what I say. To which my 12-year-old goes, well, can't I go to a hybrid school now, please, mummy? Damn, that's a really good answer, son. I think that's what the pandemic taught us, wasn't it? Yeah, sorry, I need to give you a proper answer. Why do they need to go to school? They need to go to school to give themselves life choices. And unfortunately, at the moment, the only way really that we can kind of operationalize life choice is to give you experience through schooling. Although I do feel that schooling, for me, from my perspective, is a lot more about socialization rather than objective fact learning. But I guess that again is from my perspective, whereas cognitively learning things is a lot easier than the social and emotional subjective learning of how people interact. That so-called hidden curriculum that we've had circulating around in education for the last 30 years or so. So for a 10-year-old, I think it is to enable them for choice. That's my idea of an answer. Unfortunately, I think it sits within a system where education is not always fit for purpose, and it's a lot about productivity and economic growth which, not necessarily bad things, but I think there's a wider context. I used to do this with the trainee teachers, what is the purpose of education? And it's quite interesting what backgrounds people come with. For me, because I'm from a working class background and I've only got choice in life through knowledge is not, well, I don't want to say power, but through learning things. And it's that whole Michael Young powerful knowledge debate there, which I sometimes agree with, I sometimes don't. But I do feel there is a body of knowledge sometimes that can enable people for choice. But I don't think that should be at the detriment of skills. Skills are also important as well. So I'd say it would depend a lot on the child that I was explaining it to. Like I say, for my children, they go to school to learn how to socialise more than to learn about stuff, because they can learn about stuff. They're quite good at doing that by themselves. But for another child, it may be more about learning stuff rather than socialising. Say if they were from a big family or a large community that interacts quite a lot, they might have a different purpose. Yeah. Sorry, all I've really answered there is it depends.
You answered it great. You answered it greatly, but I don't think you win the prize for the quickest quickfire. I'll be honest. I'm just going to call that out as well.
I don't do quickfire.
But that's absolutely fine. It has been an absolute blast. I definitely feel, and I'm sure Ben would say this as well, Joey, it sets it up for a part 2. I think it's been a pleasure to have you on. It's been great to
I've won.
You've won. You've not won a quickfire, but we're definitely gonna do that. And it's a pleasure to have met you at different events now and to work in the same space as you, Joe. It's great to have these chats. I'm excited to dive into the book and step into it. So should all of the guests. The link will be in the show notes. And Victoria, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Please.
Go get it, everybody. Go get it.
Thank you.
Get it
Thank you for having me on. It's been lovely.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.